In this series of videos, we're going to look at how you can accurately record base maps using Vectorworks. So there are a couple different things. There's a million different ways that you can record your site measurements as a base map in the software, but I wanted to specifically introduce you to the 2D loci tool, as well as moving things along that X and Y axis, and then some of the additional drafting aids that can benefit you for base maps. To get started, let me introduce you up here to there we go. The 2D locus tool. The keyboard shortcut for this one is 0, and it's located in your basic tool set. Basically, all a loci is it hangs out in your drawing. It's a point that you can always come back and click to. It's just represented as an X if it's a 2D loci. See, and now if I were to go ahead, I'm going to just use the line tool. So if I've accurately plotted where those loci points are, I can now just easily click and draw it anywhere in between those plants. So essentially a loci, it's just defining an area in space. And let me show you, I went ahead, I would prefer for this lesson that you guys go and you measure just a very small area of your yard. It's good to be able to see a site, measure a site, and then draw the base map for the site, because going from each and every single one of those steps is just going to reinforce the learning, as opposed to if you use my measurements, which they are available on D2L, you're really just skipping the step and only processing and getting the measurements into Vectorworks. So anyway, that's my spiel about preferably you should be doing your own measurements. I think that that's going to be beneficial to you. But I did want to show you what my measurements look like. And when I draft, I preferably start with a baseline. So you can see right here at 0, 0, that's where my baseline begins. And then all measurements go along this axis point. And so that's how I'm going to be drafting this one. So you're welcome to look at this. We'll periodically go back to these measurements. I believe the first thing we should probably do is draw this line right here. So this whole thing right here is a driveway. Then there's a planting area that has retaining wall all along those edges, and then the neighbor's house is right there. And it was important to record where the windows of that houses. So there's two windows that we're looking at right there, and then also they have like a big fan that's part of their, I guess, central heating or cooling of their house. That's important to know for screening purposes here. So yeah, basically we're going to take a look at this. We'll get the driveway drawn in first using the access points, and then we'll just take it from there. So going back into Vectorworks, I need to go ahead and place my first, this is going to be 0, 0 essentially, or I could even, let's make this even more accurate. So if I place it just right smack dab in the middle of the drawing where that blue bullseye is, you can see up here that I am at 0, 0. And then what I can do, I like to leave one 2D loci in the center, and then I just keep clicking them on top of that, and then I move them from there. So let's go back to the drawing and look at the first point that we're going to move. And along this point, I think I'd like to get here to the beginning. There's a stem wall or curb at the end of that driveway, and you can see that that's at 35.5 feet along the x-axis, and then it's 0 along the y-axis, meaning that it's perfectly in line with 0, 0. So let's come back in here. I've already popped in my second 2D loci, and then I can come up here. There's a couple different ways you can move your 2D loci point. The first one I'm going to show you is up here in the object info palette. So I'm just going to type in 35.5 feet and then tab, and then it moved that point for me. Then if I go back to the drawing, I can look in here and I can see, okay, And this was recorded using like an engineer's rule. So 0.5 is not 5 inches, it's a half of a foot. So I can see that from this point to this point, the thickness of that stem wall is 6 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that stem wall. And then if I look down here, I can see that if this is the x-axis right here, I'm stopping at 36 along the x-axis, and then I'm going down negative 9 feet 2 inches. So let's go ahead and record that stem wall. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and use my wall tool. You don't have to, because base maps, essentially, they can be like really simple line work, but normally you're going to have to come back after the fact and add walls anyway, so I'll just go ahead and do it now. I entered into the tool preferences for the wall tool because I want to make sure that the wall that I'm drawing is going to be at 6 inches thick. So that's good. Click OK. And then I'm going to click that locus point in order to start my wall. And I am paying attention to the side of my control line, so right control line. There we go. And then I'm just going to hit tab once, and that's going to allow me to enter in the length. And if you'll remember, that's going to be 9 feet 2 inches, and the angle is set at negative 90 degrees, so that's correct. And then just have to hit enter twice in order for it to accept it, because you could see it wanted to draw the second leg of that wall. So I always think it's a good idea to go back and measure and make sure that that got entered in correctly. And you can see using the tape measure tool that that is 9 feet 2 inches. So there we go. Now I have the beginning of my driveway, and I can actually come and use the line tool. And we'll just go ahead. Essentially, you're just playing connect the dots, really. So we've made that dot. Now let's go ahead. There's a bit of a curve on the other side of the driveway, so now I need to enter in those points. And to do that, what I'm going to do is, you can see that here I was using baseline measurements off of this nice straight line, and I was doing it in increments of 10 feet. So I went from 0, 0, I moved down 10 feet, and then I took another one at 20 feet, and then just to add an extra measurement, I went to 25 feet, and then I ended up at 30 feet. That was the last measurement that I took there. So we're going to create a grid so that we know where those 10-foot increments are. And in order to do that, we'll come back to the drawing. And I'm just going to draw a straight line through 0, 0. And then I'm going to come over and use the Move by Points tool right there. I want this first one, the Move mode, because it's going to allow me to enter in the exact spacing that I want between all of my lines. And then I'm going to come over here to the number of duplicates. And I'm going to go ahead and do this at, let's still do it at 10 feet increments. So in the end, I only need 3 duplicate lines. So I want 3 duplicates of this line. And then I'm going to, with that line selected, I'm going to click once where I want that to originate from. And then I'm going to drag in the direction that I want it to go. Click tab, and then I'm going to be able to enter the length. And since I know I want my grid spacing for this to be 10 feet, I can now enter in 10 feet. Hit return, hit it again, and then it evenly spaced all of those lines. So this, speaking purely about the x-axis, this is 0x, 10x, 20x, and 30x right there. I don't have measurements in my particular drawing that move at such regular intervals along the y-axis. So I'm not going to go ahead and create new grid lines moving in that direction, but you would do it exactly the same way. And I've probably skipped over something that I should have mentioned that I'm taking for granted, but that is, if this is your x-axis runs in this direction. There's a difference between a positive and a negative number when you're moving along any of these axes. So if it's the x-axis going from left to right is a positive number, but going from right to left is a negative number. And then for the y-axis, a positive number moves you up the page, whereas a negative number moves you down a page. Okay, so going back to our grid, if I go ahead and select all of my grid lines that I'm going to use as a drafting aid, I come over here to the Modify menu, and then come down to the guides. And essentially, I've been calling this a grid because essentially that's what I'm making, but I'm going to tell the software that this is a guide. So I'm going to move over here and go Make Guide. And then essentially all that did was I now have 4 lines that if you look over here, they're locked. I can click to those lines, but they're locked. So it means that I can't modify that line in any way. Let's come over here. So I'm trying to like click and drag and it just won't let me. So now I have a nice grid, and you can modify that grid for whatever makes sense to you. You can use this not only in Basemaps if you used a baseline measurement where you recorded a curve at regular intervals, but you can also use this if you are looking at the lines on the house that you want to align to. You can go ahead and you can make grids based on that. And it would be a good idea, if you're going to do that, to go ahead and have like a specific layer or a different class. But you can see that this actually auto-classed as a guide. That's not a class that I created. So what that means is I could come over here in the navigation palette and I could look for the guides class and I can turn that off. And that way I don't have to delete my guides. They can just exist in my document, but when it comes time to make a sheet layer for presentation, I can just make sure that that class is turned off so that it won't be presented. So that's how guides work. In the next video, we're actually going to go ahead and place some of those points to make up the curve of that driveway.